Snow cuts across the frozen Yukon River like a knife, the kind of cold that bites through wool coats and freezes breath in midair. It's 1901, and Friedrich Trump is standing outside his makeshift Arctic hotel in Whitehorse watching everything fall apart. The Canadian Mounties in their bright red coats are raiding his place, their boots thundering across the wooden floors as they haul out women in silk dresses who clutch brass scales in their trembling hands. Gold dust spills across the wooden planks with that distinctive clink, the sound of a fortune slipping away. Friedrich's weathered face shows every hard year he's spent on the frontier, every questionable deal he's made in the shadows. The wind howls around him, carrying away the shouts and chaos. He watches his carefully built empire crumble, knowing deep down that this money built on desperate miners during the loneliest nights of the gold rush is going to haunt his bloodline for generations to come. If stories about old money families and their secrets grab your attention, hit that like button and subscribe. We dig deep into the rise and fall of America's most controversial dynasties, and your comments help keep these conversations going. The story really starts back in 1885. Picture New York Harbor, crowded, noisy, overwhelming. A skinny 16-year-old kid named Friedrich Trump steps off a steamship from Bavaria, Germany. He's the son of a barber from a tiny town called Karlstadt, and he's carrying basically nothing, just a beat-up suitcase with a few German marks and big dreams. He's also running from something mandatory military service back home. He's not interested in being a soldier. The Statue of Liberty towers over him, though her famous torch isn't even lit yet. She's still under construction, just like America itself. Friedrich pushes through the massive crowds of immigrants and boards, a train heading west to Seattle, where his sister has already settled. Seattle in those days was rough, a boomtown that smelled like sawdust and sea salt from Puget Sound, where opportunity mixed with danger on every muddy street. By 1891, Friedrich has scraped together enough money from odd jobs to buy a small restaurant called the Poodle Dog on Washington Street. He renames it the Dairy Restaurant and paints the front a crisp white, trying to make it look respectable against the mud and chaos of Pioneer Square. Seattle's growing fast saloons, lit by gas lamps, line every block. Casinos run 24 hours a day, and the whole city has this wild energy as Washington Territory pushes towards statehood. Friedrich installs nice oak tables and a proper stove for cooking steaks and oysters. But here's the thing everyone whispered about: the real money wasn't in the restaurant downstairs. Upstairs, he had what he called rooms for ladies, private spaces where miners and lumber workers could spend their silver coins on companionship and entertainment. The air up there was thick with cigar smoke and perfume, and the whole operation made Friedrich's restaurant one of the hottest spots on the line, which was what everyone called Seattle's red light district. It wasn't exactly respectable, but it was profitable. 3 years later, in 1894, Friedrich hears whispers about gold in the Cascade Mountains near a place called Monte Cristo. He sells the restaurant and literally hikes into the wilderness, staking a mining claim on land that's not entirely his to claim. He throws up a 2-story wooden building with Trump's Hotel painted across the front. Downstairs, he serves venison stew and whiskey to bearded prospectors who haven't seen civilization in weeks. Upstairs, well, it's the same business model as Seattle private rooms, where men could find comfort after long, lonely months in the mountains. His ledger books fill up with profits. Everyone thinks the Northern Pacific Railroad is going to come through the area, which would make the land worth a fortune. But the railroad never comes. Friedrich doesn't panic, though. When one opportunity dies, he just moves to the next one. That's his entire philosophy. Then comes 1897, and word spreads like wildfire about the Klondike Gold strikes up in Canada's Yukon territory. The newspapers are full of stories, people pulling nuggets the size of chicken eggs, even fists, straight from freezing creek beds. It's the biggest gold rush since California in 1849, and it sets off a stampede of humanity, unlike anything the continent has seen. Friedrich, always with his ear to the ground for the next opportunity, packs up everything he's earned, roughly $500 in today's money, and joins tens of thousands heading north. He hires Tlingit Packers, indigenous people, who actually know how to survive the brutal terrain to haul his supplies over the infamous Chilkoot Pass. This isn't some pleasant hike, we're talking about one of the most dangerous mountain passes in North America. His gear includes crates of bacon flour tools and even pre-cut lumber, all strapped to their backs as they climb through blinding snow and treacherous ice. The Canadian government requires every prospector to bring a year's worth of supplies, which means hauling literally a ton of gear up a 45-degree slope. Horses literally drop dead from exhaustion in a gulch that people start calling Dead Horse Gulch because of all the frozen carcasses littering the trail. Friedrich, ever the opportunist with an eye for turning tragedy into profit, grills the dead horses and sells the meat to starving prospectors who haven't eaten fresh protein in weeks. It's grim and morbid, but it's business, and nobody is thinking about ethics when they're that hungry and desperate. He makes it to Bennett, British Columbia, a temporary tent city where thousands of gold seekers are camping in freezing conditions, waiting for the lakes to thaw so they can continue north to Dawson City. Friedrich partners with a businessman named Ernest Levin, and together they build the new Arctic restaurant and hotel using prefabricated boards they'd hauled over the mountains. The building has an impressive false front that towers over the tent city by the frozen lake. The menu is wild for such a remote place: moose roast, swan pie, and caribou steaks. They smuggle in liquor past the Canadian Mounties and charge premium prices because people will pay anything when they're cold hungry and far from home. But the real money comes from the private sections, curtained-off areas with velvet couches, brass beds, and hanging scales to weigh out gold flakes as payment for private entertainment and companionship. Women with colorful names like Monte Carlo Nell and the Oregon Mare work these rooms, and exhausted miners with heavy pokes full of gold dust pay generously for a few hours of human company in a landscape that's brutally isolated. The scales clink in the candlelight ceiling transactions that Friedrich carefully never puts in his official accounting books. Business absolutely explodes as thousands of people flood through Bennett on their way to Dawson. Friedrich keeps the place open around the clock. The kitchen fires never stop, and upstairs, the transactions never stop either. It's a gold mine, literally and figuratively. When Bennett starts to fade because the railroad finally arrives and people can bypass the town, Friedrich does something incredibly clever. He takes the entire building apart piece by piece and rafts it 40 miles down the Yukon River to Whitehorse. In 19, he rebuilds it next to the new railroad tracks. The place stands there like a beacon of indulgence, its signs glowing from oil lamps reflected in the snow. By the time the Canadian authorities finally crack down on gambling and adult entertainment, Friedrich has amassed close to $1 million in adjusted dollars. It's an insane fortune for a former barber's son. In 1901, with his pockets full, Friedrich heads back to Bavaria to find a wife. He marries Elizabeth Christ, a local girl with sharp features and sharper instincts, in a quiet Lutheran ceremony. Church bells ring through the village as Friedrich dreams about settling down in his homeland. But there's a problem: the Bavarian government hasn't forgotten that he dodged the draft all those years ago. They stamp his paperwork undesirable and deport him in 1905. Friedrich and Elizabeth are forced onto a ship called the SS Pennsylvania, heading back to New York. They arrive with 80 in savings, over $2.5 million today, and settle in the Bronx among German-speaking immigrants packed into tenement buildings. Friedrich is smart with his money. He invests in barbershops and small restaurants in Queens, but he quickly realizes that real estate is where the real future lies. Queens is exploding as new subway lines push outward from Manhattan, and working-class families need affordable housing. Friedrich buys modest lots in neighborhoods like Woodhaven and starts building simple homes for everyday people. His portfolio grows steadily. Everything seems to be working out perfectly, and then disaster strikes. The Spanish flu pandemic sweeps through New York in 1918, killing hundreds of thousands of Americans. Friedrich catches it and dies in bed at age 49, delirious with fever. His last words are lost to history. His 12-year-old son Fred watches as undertakers carry the coffin down the narrow tenement stairs. Fred inherits more than just money. He He inherits his father's ruthless business instinct and his willingness to do whatever it takes to win. Fred Trump soaks up his father's lessons like a sponge. He's born in 1905 and grows up during the wild, roaring 20s learning carpentry, while flappers dance in illegal speakeasies and Model T Fords jam the streets. By 1923, when he's just 18 years old, he starts a company called Trump and Son. He's too young to legally sign business documents, so his mother Elizabeth signs everything for him. They focus on building single-family homes in Queens for the waves of Irish and Italian immigrants flooding into New York after World War I. When the stock market crashes in 1929, when wealthy brokers are literally jumping out of Wall Street skyscrapers and breadlines snake around city blocks with unemployed men in threadbare coats, most builders and developers go completely bankrupt overnight. Not Fred Trump. While everyone else is panicking and losing everything, he's quietly positioning himself to take advantage of the chaos. He scavenges materials from failed construction projects all over New York, buying lumber, bricks, and fixtures at rock-bottom bankruptcy prices. He finances his own builds instead of relying on banks that are failing left and right, which gives him a massive advantage over competitors who are drowning in debt and foreclosures. It's calculated, ruthless, and incredibly effective. By the mid-1930s, when Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal is pumping federal money into housing programs to revive the economy, Fred is perfectly positioned to scale up massively. He builds entire apartment complexes like Shorehaven in Brooklyn, 500 units, rising from former marshland, all built in the popular Art Deco architectural style, with manicured lawns and modern amenity. He rents them to white-collar middle-class workers who desperately want to escape Manhattan's crowded, dirty, increasingly difficult streets. These aren't luxury buildings, but they're solid, affordable, and they fill a huge need in the market. Fred understands his customer base perfectly. World War I turns Fred into a genuine real estate mogul. Government contracts flood in from military barracks and housing near naval shipyards. His construction crews work overtime, sometimes under blackout curtains, because German U-boats are actually lurking off the coast of Coney Island. After the war ends, when guys come home in their uniforms with VA loans in their pockets, Fred is ready. He builds massive developments like Beach Haven, tall red brick buildings overlooking the Belt Parkway. His portfolio eventually includes 27 apartments worth hundreds of millions of dollars. He rides around in a chauffeured Cadillac, barking orders at construction sites in his thick New York accent. Fred isn't just building apartment buildings. He's building a dynasty. But there's a dark side to Fred's empire that can't be ignored. Under all those gleaming buildings, there's a pattern of discrimination that eventually catches up with him. In the 1950s, whispers circulate about instructions given to rental agents to mark applications with the letter C, which stood for a racial designation steering black families away from certain buildings while letting units sit empty. As the civil rights movement builds momentum in places like Selma and Montgomery, these practices come under scrutiny. In 1973, the Department of Justice actually sues Trump management for systematic discrimination. The case is serious. There's evidence of fake no-vacancy signs being shown to minority applicants, while the same apartments are immediately available to white applicants. The trial takes place in Brooklyn federal court, typewriters clicking as lawyers dig through Fred's ledgers. Fred sits through depositions wearing his horn-rimmed glasses, his face showing nothing. The shadows go back even further. In 1927, when Fred is just 21 years old, he's arrested at a Ku Klux Klan rally in Jamaica, Queens. 1,000 people in white robes are marching through the streets, clashing with police. The New York Times reports the arrest, listing an address that matches Fred's home. He denies it later, but the newspaper record is there. This is happening the same year that America is obsessed with the Lindbergh baby kidnapping, and the Trump family is quietly burying their German heritage as anti-immigrant sentiment grows and swastikas start appearing across Europe. Friedrich's deportation from Bavaria becomes a family secret, especially during World War I, when anti-German hysteria is so intense that Americans rename sauerkraut Liberty Cabbage and smash Dachshund statues. The Trumps blend into the American melting pot, hiding their background. But that ambition, that relentless drive, hardens Fred into a demanding taskmaster, especially with his own kids. His eldest son, Freddie, born in 1938, dreams of flying TW jets across the Atlantic Ocean. He doesn't want to manage leaky apartment buildings in Queens. He wants the sky. Freddie's rebellion simmers for years. He goes to cocktail parties on yachts in the Hamptons, laughing and drinking martinis instead of poring over rental ledgers like his father wants. He gets his pilot's license in 1960 during the Kennedy era, when everything feels possible.
But Fred's response is brutal.
"You're just a glorified bus driver," he tells Freddie over dinner at the family's mahogany table. The criticism cuts deep. Freddie starts drinking more heavily. Bottles of scotch become his escape. His marriage to Linda Clapp falls apart in messy courtrooms by 1970. Their children, Mary and Fred, are caught in the middle of bitter custody battles. The family curse deepens with Donald, born in 1946. Fred molds Donald in his own image, sending him to New York Military Academy, where bugle calls echo across the Hudson River and discipline is enforced through pressed uniforms and strict routines. Donald comes back, ready to steer the family business toward Manhattan's glittering skyline instead of Queens' modest brick buildings. In 1971, he renames the company the Trump Organization, the same year the Watergate scandal is beginning to unravel. Donald's vision is casinos and towers, flashy projects that promise bigger returns than Fred's steady, boring apartment buildings. The family bonds fracture. Freddie is pushed out of the succession line in the 1960s, left drifting without purpose. He ends up working maintenance at one of Fred's buildings, literally sweeping hallways while his younger brother climbs toward fame. The resentment builds during late-night phone calls laced with insults and regret. In 1981, Freddie collapses in a Queens hospital room. His heart fails at age 42, destroyed by years of heavy drinking. The EKG monitor flatlines. Nurses pull white sheets over his thin frame. Fred doesn't even make it to the bedside. He's too busy with business deals to say goodbye to his firstborn son. Ambition devours everything in its path. Scandals start erupting everywhere. In 1990, Donald's Atlantic City casinos are drowning in debt. The Taj Mahal's marble halls echo with slot machine sounds, but the debts are mounting to $3 billion. Bondholders circle like vultures over the boardwalk. Bankruptcy filings pile up 6 times between 1990 and 2009. Creditors seize assets while Donald fights to keep his name on golden plaques because the brand is all that's left. The personal toll is devastating. Donald's divorce from Ivana explodes across tabloids in 1990. Affairs with Marla Maples on Aspen's ski slopes become front-page news. Manhattan Supreme Court divides up penthouses and prenuptial agreements. Alimony checks for $25 million sign away years of Trump Tower glamour and whatever love might have existed. Family betrayals cut even deeper. When Freddie's will is read, Donald isn't included in certain trusts. But Fred secretly rewrites provisions funneling millions to Donald's ventures, while other family members get left out. Niece Mary Trump eventually sues in 2000 over denied inheritances. The Nassau County courtroom fills with accusations of fraud and manipulation. Family members taking opposite sides, lawyers picking apart decades of financial decisions. Fred himself finally succumbs in 1999 at 93 years old. Alzheimer's disease clouds his final days in a bed at Long Island Jewish Medical Center. His empire is valued at around $300 million, but the IRS immediately audits the estate, claiming the values are deliberately understated. The funeral at Marble Collegiate Church draws real estate developers in expensive suits. Rain slicks Fifth Avenue as the hearse rolls past buildings Fred built half a century earlier. Donald's trajectory only gets more chaotic. His 2016 rise to the White House masks deep fractures that are about to crack wide open. Impeachments hit in 2019 and 2021, first over Ukraine phone calls, then over the Capitol riots. Donald denies everything from podiums and Twitter, but former allies start testifying against him in Georgia courtrooms. The legal walls close in from every direction. By 2023, fraud convictions in New York start stripping away assets. A judge orders $355 million in penalties, draining resources that seemed endless. Classified documents are found stacked in Mar-a-Lago bathrooms. Federal indictments pile up like unpaid bills, each one adding to a legal nightmare that seems to have no exit. The family itself unravels in real time. Melania's distance becomes obvious, their public appearances turn stiff and awkward. The Stormy Daniels hush money trial happens in 2024, resulting in guilty verdicts on 34 counts. Donald becomes a convicted felon. The Manhattan courtroom's fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows on his face during sentencing. Even the business empire crumbles. Truth Social, his social media platform, hemorrhages value stock prices, plummet 70% in 2025 amid SAC investigations. Golf courses face lines from unpaid debts. The Scottish golf links get battered by North Sea storms, a perfect symbol of overreach and decline. Today, the Trump name still exists on buildings and golf courses scattered across multiple continents. But it's more of a ghost than actual power, a brand that's simultaneously famous and infamous, recognized everywhere, but trusted nowhere. Mar-a-Lago hosts political fundraisers under massive crystal chandeliers that were actually salvaged from foreclosed properties during past financial crises. There's an irony there that's almost too perfect, like the universe making a point. Descendants like Ivanka retreat to multi-million-dollar Miami mansions, bought with Kushner family billions, accumulated through completely separate real estate ventures. Her fashion lines have folded after boycotts and declining sales, but she still has diplomatic connections from White House years and whispered influence in certain political circles that value loyalty over everything else. Barron, the youngest Trump, is supposedly attending Oxford in 2026. His tall, lanky frame dodges paparazzi cameras outside Magdalen College gates. You can imagine the weight of that last name pressing down on him like an invisible crown. The expectations, the scandals, the history he can't escape. Mary Trump writes Expose S from her study in Sag Harbor, dissecting the family dysfunction in best-selling books stacked in Barnes and Noble windows. The royalties fund therapy sessions for inherited trauma that spans generations. The fortune that Friedrich built started with gold dust weighed on scales in private establishments on the frozen Yukon, now scatters across trusts and LCs. IRS agents in windowless offices audit every transaction. The value has eroded through lawsuits totaling over $500 million in penalties and settlements. Echoes of Friedrich's original hotel still exist in Canadian historical parks. There's a reconstructed facade in Bennett that draws tourists during summer months. Audio tours tell the story of the gold rush and the vice that came with it. Parks Canada rangers point to faded menus, while wind howls through pine trees carrying stories from more than a century ago. So here's the question that lingers: what's the real price of ambition when power finally slips through your fingers, leaving nothing but ghosts in the accounting ledgers and names on buildings that might not last another generation? When the gold dust settles and the scales stop clinking, what actually remains?